Madam President.
The senator from Alaska.
Thank you, Madam President. Request that proceedings under the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Last week, I spoke on 5 of the steps that we need to take to increase domestic oil production. And today I would like to take just a few moments to speak more broadly about our nation's energy policy as a whole, what the proper goals for such a policy should be, and the false choice between increased domestic production and reduced oil consumption. Energy policy has repeatedly been brought up as an area where this Congress and this President can find common ground. Knowing that something actually needs to be done, however, is no guarantee that it will be done. But the truth of it is, most of us know that we can improve in the area of energy. And with oil prices at above $100 a barrel, the price at the pump heading towards $4 a gallon, we need to develop a coherent national energy policy. To find that common ground, that need has taken on even greater urgency. So what makes for good energy policy, and how can we ensure that agreement is finally reached on meaningful energy legislation? I think we should have essentially 5 goals. And those 5 goals are an energy that is abundant, that is affordable, that is clean, diverse, and domestic. Now, I realize that these words, especially in combination with one another, don't lend a clever acronym or a catchy slogan. Maybe we need to rearrange them and figure out what word we can make. But if we follow these as our guiding principles and make sure that our legislative efforts reflect each and every one, I believe that genuine progress can be within our reach. So let's start with the concept of affordable energy, because that's certainly the most relevant topic right now. Times like these serve as a wake-up call as to how important energy, and particularly affordable domestic energy, how important this really is to our nation. Energy provides the base of everything that we do, not just to heat and power and light and transportation, but the food that we eat, the clothes that we wear, everything. Whether for a server farm or for a soybean farm, abundant and affordable energy is really the foundation for a robust economy. But unfortunately, there seem to be those who feel that the key to clean energy is to make energy scarce and expensive. We don't need an experiment or an act of Congress to know that an economic recession reduces emission, and a depression, of course, would even do more so. The current price of oil is a stark reminder that while making energy scarce and expensive may in fact reduce our emissions, it's an even more effective way to crush an economic recovery. That's not good for us. The President has proposed that we should raise the taxes on oil companies. But in the middle of tough economic times, the American people are not open to those policies that will increase their energy costs. There is a better path that would do more to bolster our energy security, more to create jobs, more to generate government revenues, and equally more to reduce our deficit. Instead of punishing one industry to promote another, let's use our tremendous reserves of conventional resources, which account for more than 80% of our energy supply. Let's use these to fund the next generation of clean technologies. Let's prove up and produce our resources, and then put these revenues towards, whether it's tax incentives, whether it's additional research, whether it's studies at our universities, you name it. But let's use these wisely. Now, speaking specifically to the regulatory burdens on energy, I think we all recognize that the Clean Air Act has made our air cleaner and certainly improved our health. Carbon monoxide, SOx, NOx, a host of other pollutants have largely been removed from smokestack and tailpipe emissions. And there's more that we can do, I think we recognize, in terms of the regulation of HFCs and other greenhouse gases, which, while they emit much lesser quantities, they certainly have potent greenhouse effects. But the Clean Air Act is not the proper legal framework for regulation of carbon dioxide, which is emitted in huge quantities by almost every human activity, whose effect cannot be confined to a non-attainment area, and which in itself is not harmful to health. All of us, Madam President, want a cleaner energy supply. But the approach taken over the last several years seems to have been one of all or nothing instead of the all of the above approach. And I think it's been counterproductive. We need to seek out and accept policies that will lead to steady progress. Now, we don't yet know the best way to provide energy that is clean and abundant and affordable. But what we do know is that there is a whole myriad of opportunities. We have oil, natural gas, we've got wind, we've got solar, we've got hydro, we've got geothermal, coal, biofuels, fission, fusion. Just naming the types of energy and the subcategories within energies, that's a whole floor speech in and of itself. And whether it turns out to be fireflies that you collect in a bottle or something that we simply haven't even imagined yet, we don't know what source or what combination of sources will actually turn out to be best for America. And that should be cause for those of us here in Congress to be extraordinarily careful in trying to predetermine what sources should either win or lose. We're always talking around here about we need to steer clear of picking winners and losers, and yet that's what we do all the time. A diversity of energy sources provides the best proving ground and insurance against over-reliance on any one source, and a healthy economy provides the best demand for the cleanest sources available. Winston Churchill once said, "On no one quality, on no one process, on no one country, on no one route, and on no one field must we be dependent. Safety and certainty in oil lie in variety and variety alone." Now, Winston Churchill was talking about oil, but his words are just as applicable to our need for diversity in all of our types of energy. Now, finally, the need to make our energy domestic to the greatest degree possible is something that we've all known. We all know that we need to do this, but we have failed to do anything about it for decades. And it shouldn't take an upheaval in North Africa to convince us that sending billions of dollars a day out of our economy to countries that are not our friends, that this is a bad idea. We know it's a bad idea, and yet we continue year after year after year. We need to focus on two parallel tracks here: increased domestic production and decreased consumption. We absolutely should reduce our dependence on oil. In the early days of the automobile, we saw a wide range of experiments in inventors and entrepreneurs who strove to find the best approach. And I think, again, we're on the verge of this renaissance in vehicle technologies where we explore electric vehicles, we look at biofuels, fuel cells, efficient diesels, natural gas, propane, other approaches. But for right now, for today, Madam President, we use 20 million barrels of oil a day, and for the vast majority of uses, there is no imminent substitute. I said last week in my comments that for the sake of our national economy, for the sake of our nation's security, and for the sake of the world's environment, we should produce the highest possible percentage of the oil that we consume here at home. Domestic production is currently being stifled by those who engage in what I don't know, I guess you call it a magical thinking, that if only we would stop producing oil here in the United States, then the world's need for oil is going to go away. Well, you know, the Skittles are going to fall from the sky. You're going to have unicorns prancing in the street. It's not real. The harsh reality is that our foreign oil dependence contributes to conflicts where young men and young women die or come home without limbs, and we wreck our economy. There always will be future conflicts in the world, whether in the Middle East or elsewhere, and as a nation, we will have to decide on our proper role in each. We can and we should do everything possible, however, to eliminate foreign oil dependence as a strategic consideration. And, Madam President, none of this is due to America running out of oil. In Alaska, my home state, we have estimated reserves in excess of 65 years' worth of Persian Gulf imports. So again, in Alaska alone, one state, we've got reserves in excess of 65 years of what we take from the Persian Gulf. There are also, of course, tremendous reserves in other states and, of course, offshore. But for decades, opponents of domestic production have argued that we shouldn't produce more because we're not going to see this come online for years to come. If 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, we had ignored those who had said that ANWR was unacceptable because it would take a decade to develop, we would now, at this point in time, be enjoying another 1 million barrels of domestic production per day. But we said 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that it's going to take too long to bring that ANWR oil online, and so we just ought not do it. Well, look where it puts us today. Opponents also like to say that the policy of increased domestic production will have no immediate effect on oil prices. You don't even want to waste time arguing the folly of trying to dismiss good national energy policy because it's long-term. I'll also note that using the strategic oil reserve to mitigate high oil prices, to maybe push them back below $100 a barrel for a short term, maybe a couple weeks, this should be unacceptable to us. It should be unacceptable. We need a viable long-term answer, not a short-term and short-sighted political alibi. There is nothing that OPEC fears more than America committing to the twin tracks of increased domestic production and reduced consumption. Were we to do so, you would see OPEC doing everything in their power to drive down world oil prices, to make us abandon our policies, and once again hamstring ourselves, once again make us reliant on them for our oil. But I want to offer an important perspective on this. Even if you cannot accept that America increasing production and decreasing consumption would affect global oil prices, remember, price is not the only reason to advance such a policy. Right now, the high price of oil works against America, and it works for every nation that deliberately produces its reserves. Production provides them with jobs, it provides them with revenue for their governments, it provides better trade balances and national security, but all at our country's expense. We are the only country that has identified a huge resource base and then absolutely refused to produce it. So often we hear on this floor discussion about China eating our lunch in clean energy, about Japan and Germany outpacing us in wind and solar technology. But does anybody think that if those countries had a Gulf of Mexico or an ANWR, that they would not be drilling in those areas as we speak? Does anyone think that those nations demagogue nuclear power or refuse to permit coal plants? Their energy policies are on better track than ours. They're not just looking at what is happening today. They're looking tomorrow. They're looking today. They've got an energy policy that carries them out. There's an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday by Nansen Salary. He concludes his article with the statement that the U.S. does not have an energy problem. It has an energy strategy problem. Think about that. It's not lacking the resources. It's the strategy for how we develop our energy resources. During his campaign, President Obama liked to quote Dr. Martin Luther King, and he talked about the fierce urgency of now. And there are few issues more important or more fundamental to our nation's long-term success than a viable energy policy. People are very correct when they say that parts of this will take time. Parts of it will take a longer period of time. But now is never more fiercely urgent than when we have such an important and such a long journey ahead of us. If we're ever going to take control of our energy future, now is the time to come together, support the policies that promote abundant, affordable, clean, diverse, and domestic energy. Critically important to us, Madam President, and I look forward to these conversations that will continue on the floor as we talk about ways that we not only work to reduce our budget, ways that we not only work to create jobs in this country, but ways that we truly build a strategic energy policy for the long term for this country. Thank you, Madam President. With that, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
General speeches all day today in the U.S. Senate. A short time ago, we heard Senator Bernie Sanders come to the floor. He joined with Democrats in voting against their Democrats' spending measure that failed in the Senate yesterday. The Republicans' bill, which would cut spending this year by $57 billion, it lost yesterday by a vote of 44 to 56. And the Democrats' bill would cut $6.5 billion, was rejected 42 to 58. Well, this from the Hill today. Senate Majority Leader Reid said that he is ready to compromise on spending after a GOP spending bill won more votes in the Senate than the Democratic alternative. We accept the lessons of yesterday's vote, Senator Reid said in statements today. We know we'll have to make a sacrifice to reach consensus, and we're willing to do that. He also noted the looming March 18th deadline when the stopgap spending that is currently funding the government will expire. If Congress doesn't approve a new funding measure, there would be a government shutdown.
Madam President.
The senator from Nevada.
Madam President, I ask the call of the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, today I want to talk about gasoline prices and energy. Just a few years ago, this nation was in the middle of an energy crisis not unlike the one that we are in today. Back then, Nevadans were confronted with record prices at the gas pump, and this body did nothing to relieve their burden. When I joined with my colleagues to demand that we explore our own domestic energy possibilities, the call fell on deaf ears. In May of 2007, I said that, quote, moving America toward energy independence needs to be more than a bumper sticker and a campaign slogan. Unfortunately, it remained just that. Campaign promises to protect our nation's security interests remain on the campaign trail, and cheers from political rallies to increase America's energy independence were left behind with deflated balloons and forgotten confetti. Well, here we are. My colleagues on this side of the aisle and I warned against what an unstable Middle East could mean for our gasoline needs. And yet today, what are we witnessing? Turmoil in the region and escalating gasoline prices at home once again. Unfortunately, this time around, our economy is also in trouble. My state of Nevada has continued to suffer the most during this recession, and economists are not predicting quick turnaround anytime soon. The problem with this new energy crisis is that a record number of people in Nevada and around the country are now without jobs and without homes. So how are they supposed to afford $4 a gallon gasoline or maybe even $5 a gallon gasoline at the pump? I'll tell you simply, they cannot afford this. Recent unrest in Egypt and Libya and other countries has forced gas prices to rise nearly 34 cents a gallon just in the recent weeks. And to those struggling back in my state, that is verging on unaffordable. To those who are worse off, it already is. The price of gas is at a two-year high. The average price for a gallon of gasoline is now $3.52 in America. And when President Obama first took office, the average price for a gallon of gasoline was $1.84. It's a 91% increase today. And what are we doing? Nothing. In Nevada, gas prices are rising and now above $3.60 a gallon. And the biggest concern with the rising cost of gasoline is that it translates into higher prices at the grocery store and utility bills and virtually for everything that we do. And I've spoken at length over the past few years about people in my state who are being forced to decide between paying the rent and putting food on the table to feed their families. But what are they going to do if they can afford to do neither? This is a saddening thought for me, but a reality for many others. Throughout this economic downturn, members from both sides of the aisle have come to the floor to talk about people back in their home states who are suffering. Philosophical differences aside, both parties have put forth legislation that they believe will help the economic plight of many Americans. What have we done about energy prices that threaten to derail recovering families? Nothing. Rising gas prices affect nearly every sector of our economy. Everywhere you look in America today, our economy continues to be directly affected by the skyrocketing price of fuel. And at a time when unemployment is over 14% in my home state, and Americans are already struggling financially, we can no longer allow this problem to be ignored or to be set aside. We need real solutions that develop our domestic energy and oil production, and we need those solutions to decrease our dependence on dangerous foreign oil. Now, we send over $500 billion a year out of this country to buy foreign oil. And a lot of that money ends up financing the very people who would do us harm. What America needs is everything but foreign oil from dangerous countries. That needs to be our energy policy so that we can ensure the price of gas does not further cripple our crumbling economy. In 2008, I spoke on the Senate floor and said these following words: "The American people are looking to us for solutions. We have a responsibility to make decisions here in order to provide them much-needed relief at home." And for many months, Republicans have been working to provide that relief. We've been focused on a three-pronged approach: boosting renewable energy and alternative energy, encouraging energy efficiency, and growing American energy supply. This line of attack balances the need for us to be responsible stewards of our environment with the need for reliable, affordable energy to fuel our lives and our economy. Again, this is what I said back in 2008 when Republicans wanted to address the need for American energy independence. But the Democrat majority had other priorities. Well, we simply cannot continue to pass the buck onto another Congress and kick the can down the road. We need to take action, and we need to do it now. Just like the spending cuts, everything needs to be on the table when discussing American energy independence. And by working to eradicate our dangerous dependence on foreign oil from the Middle East and Venezuela, we can protect Americans from choosing between paying their rent, providing food for their families, or paying for gas to drive to work. So what does an everything but dangerous foreign oil approach look like? It means 10 billion barrels of oil from ANWR up in Alaska. It means 28 billion barrels from deep-sea exploration. About 1.8 trillion barrels possibly from oil shale in Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming. Trillions of cubic feet in American natural gas. And it also means a 230-year supply of coal and great potential for nuclear energy. These are American sources of energy. And if we combine those with conservation and aggressive investment in renewable and green energy, solar, wind, geothermal, hydropower, fuel cells, and electric vehicles are all key to our American energy independence. I visited recently a couple of different places in my home state of Nevada that are producing electric cars. Those are great, but you still have to produce the energy to produce the electricity to run those electric cars. That's why we need this all-of-the-above approach for American energy independence. My home state of Nevada is actually a shining example of many innovations being made on renewable energy fronts. Nevada Solar One in Boulder City is one of the largest capacity solar power plants built in the world and generates enough electricity to power at least 14,000 households a year. Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas has the nation's biggest photovoltaic solar power system, which supplies 30% of the energy at the base. And Henderson has Nevada's first solar community, where each home has a rooftop solar electric system. And late in 2007, Astra Inc. selected Las Vegas as the site for the first United States manufacturing plant for solar thermal power systems. And the world's third largest geothermal power producer is headquartered in Reno, Nevada. And Nevada is home to the only associate degree program in the nation in energy efficiency. So it's absurd to think that people in Nevada are going to be crippled by increasing prices at the gas pump at the same time that our state is leading the way in renewable energy, simply because Congress will not act to address this crisis. Throughout this last year, bills were passed filled with unintended consequences because every dip in the economy was deemed by some to be a crisis that required an immediate solution. And yet we knowingly continue to ignore this energy crisis that we are continuing to be plagued with by our country every time that the Middle East cannot get along. According to the Department of Energy, oil is the source of more than 40% of our total energy demands and more than 99% of the fuel that we use in our cars and trucks. Senator from Alaska, Senator Murkowski, was just on the floor talking about how we all want to transition to more of a green economy. But the fact is that is going to be years and even decades away. So we have to have American sources of energy here now. The United States consumes about almost 19 million barrels of oil per day, or at least of petroleum products in 2009. We receive over half of this oil, 51%, from foreign sources, predominantly from the Middle East, Africa, and Central America. But we cannot continue to ignore this issue. Inaction is no longer an option. The Obama administration's approach to developing domestic energy production has been to impose regulations, withdraw permits, shut off access to lands that contain valuable oil and natural gas deposits. In addition, the EPA is currently regulating domestic energy resources for greenhouse gas emissions under the Clean Air Act. Well, we can no longer afford organizations such as the EPA claiming authority to cut off our access to resources because of arbitrary rules based on unsound science. These backdoor climate regulations could increase the cost of gasoline and electricity by 50%. These policies work to promote our dependence on foreign oil, and they do nothing to reduce the cost for ordinary Americans. 10 billion barrels in ANWR up in Alaska means that not drilling is not an option. ANWR is roughly the size of South Carolina. But drilling in ANWR will only be about the size of McCarran Airport in the city of Las Vegas. So about 2,000 acres out of the size of South Carolina. If you had a map here, it literally would be a dot on a huge map. That's how tiny of an area that we have to disturb to get this 10 billion barrels of oil out of ANWR. Well, and we can even access ANWR during the winter months. Drive out on ice roads that are 6 feet thick. And then in the spring, when everything starts to melt and the animals need to come out for their breeding in the springtime, we can take all of those things, cap the wells, take all of the equipment off, and let nature take its course in the summer months. Well, additionally, at least 40 billion barrels of recoverable oil in the National Petroleum Reserve, Alaska, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, in the Chukchi and Beaufort Seas mean that Alaska alone can replace crude imports from the Persian Gulf for nearly 65 years. Let me repeat that. Alaska, new oil in Alaska, can replace what we import from the Persian Gulf for the next 65 years. If that's not in the interest of America, our national security interests, and our national economic interests, I don't know what is. And I bet you that's a statistic the Obama administration would rather keep hidden. As a matter of fact, they are keeping it hidden because the EPA is blocking the ability of Americans to go in and get those oil and natural gas reserves. Well, also in Louisiana, drilling for natural gas in the Haynesville Shale resulted in an estimated $5.7 billion in new household earnings for Louisiana residents in 2009, and it created over 50,000 jobs. I mention this because going after American energy produces American jobs. And I think everybody in this chamber agrees we need American jobs today. Well, now we're finding that there are more reserves located in central Louisiana and South Mississippi, and they may contain 7 billion more barrels of natural gas. But we've also found many natural gas reserves in the rest of the country. Shale reserves in Pennsylvania and Ohio, in New York and Oklahoma and West Virginia could provide us literally with billions and billions of more barrels of natural gas. Yet in the midst of this abundance, the administration has strapped down these reserves with regulations and too long to comply with permits. The solution to this is simple. We need to streamline the process to allow America to access our own resources without the hindrance of bureaucratic red tape. If we are allowed to fully tap into the potential of these reserves, we will be one step closer to developing affordable and environmentally safe compressed natural gas vehicles. This will not only curb our reliance on dangerous foreign oil, but also create even more jobs and put us at the forefront of alternative fuel technology. By using our own natural gas reserves, we can build more power plants, improve our transportation needs through buses and trucks that run on natural gas, power our fleets, and improve our country's ability to manufacture steel, fabric, glass, and plastic that we need instead of outsourcing these jobs overseas, which is what's been happening. 28 billion barrels of deep-sea oil mean that the Obama administration cannot continue to hold these reserves hostage by banning deep-sea drilling. The Gulf of Mexico and Atlantic coast areas alone hold commercial oil reserves of 28 billion barrels of oil and up to 140 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. These are huge reserves. Despite the administration lifting its moratorium on permits late last year, only one deep water well permit has been issued in the last 11 months. Only one. We can and we must do better than this. Yesterday it was reported that the Obama administration will issue another handful of deep water drilling permits in the near future. Of course, this comes at a time when the administration is appealing a ruling from a federal court who has ordered for the administration, to act on the permits that have been pending and that have been virtually ignored by the administration. Secretary Salazar yesterday in a Senate subcommittee just yesterday said that oil production in the Gulf will not drop significantly as a result of the administration's delay. He said we may see a blip. Well, this country cannot afford to see a downward blip. As a matter of fact, we need to see an upward tick. We need to see more production coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. Recently, Senator Vitter drafted his no-cost stimulus plan, as he calls it, or his 3 Ds. Those 3 Ds are domestic energy, domestic jobs, and reducing the deficit. This bill aims to increase our ability to access domestic energy sources to increase our energy independence. It would use these domestic energy resources to create thousands of real private sector, long-term jobs in areas such as my state, where we have the potential to lead the nation in renewable energy. In 2009, the Obama administration canceled 77 oil and gas leases in Utah, and in 2010 it canceled another 61 oil and gas leases in Montana. This is astounding to me because now, instead of acting on American energy independence, we are trying to stifle the progress that we are making. So Senator Vitter's legislation would direct the Obama administration to reinstate oil and gas leases that were canceled and to open up ANWR to oil production. It would also establish an ANWR Alternative Energy Trust Fund so that we can pay for renewable energy development with our own money instead of borrowing money from China and Saudi Arabia and others to do it. The bill also restricts the EPA from imposing regulations that cut off our access to oil and gas resources instead of utilizing them. Now, we've been talking about the debt on this floor and overspending. We need legislation to go after American energy, and by the way, this legislation won't cost us any money. As a matter of fact, it brings in money to the United States Treasury because we get royalties off of American energy. That's the direction that this Senate, the House, and the President needs to take our country. Less dependence on foreign oil, more American security from an energy independent standpoint, more economic security, and more military security as well. Now, Republicans have solutions, and we're eager to start this debate, but we need the majority to bring these bills to the floor of the United States Senate. Madam President, the issues are too critical for us to delay. We can't afford to let gasoline continue to go up and up and up. $4, $5, who knows where it's going to stop. If we would have acted before, unfortunately, President Clinton vetoed the bill that would have opened up ANWR back in the mid-90s. I think we were one vote short in passing the ability to open up ANWR when President Bush was president. This body failed by one vote. That's unfortunate because if we would have opened up ANWR, we wouldn't be nearly as in bad a shape as what we're in today. But it isn't just ANWR. It's many other places where we can have American energy, and we need to act, and we need to act now. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The Senator from South Dakota.
Madam President, I rise today to talk about our nation's security and what the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, recently said is the greatest threat to America's future. He mentioned not too long ago that the greatest threat to America's national security is our national debt. Not al-Qaeda, not the Iranian nuclear threat, not instability in the Middle East or Russian spies, but our national debt. That's a stunning statement, but I think that it's backed up by the numbers. We are more than $14 trillion in debt. In 220 years of American history up to the beginning of 2009 and 43 American presidents, it took us that amount of time to pile up $6.3 trillion of publicly held debt. Under the Obama administration's latest budget, we will double that in another 2 years and triple it in 10. That budget calls for a sizable annual deficit every single year for the next 10 years. The smallest budget deficit we would face would be $607 billion in the year 2015, and then our deficits would start rising again. That's what the White House calls a balanced budget. I would call it a joke, but it's no laughing matter. And we just learned that China holds even more of our debt than the Treasury had previously thought, 26% of total U.S. debt held by foreigners. The President's budget, inevitably, would add to that. Now, that crushing debt burden that we are imposing on future generations will seriously limit their ability to live the American dream. For generations in this country, parents have sacrificed so that their children could have a better life. But today, Madam President, we are standing that tradition on its head. Excessive spending and debt threaten to make the next generation the first in our history to have a lower standard of living than the one that came before. That was not what my parents did. My father fought in World War II. He worked hard as a teacher, a coach. He drove the school bus, ran a motel in my hometown, basically did any job he could get and made whatever sacrifice he needed to make in order to keep our family fed, clothed, and sheltered. His father before him, my grandfather, traveled to this country from Norway and worked doing hard labor, laying the railroad across the plains. He started his own hardware store and ran it through the Depression and the war until he couldn't work anymore. He knew what it meant to sacrifice to take care of his family. But today, Washington seems to be saying that the generations to follow us will have to sacrifice so we won't have to make the tough choices. We don't want to do the hard work of living within our means, and so our children, our grandchildren, will just have to get by on less. Mr. President, Madam President, every one of us in this Congress should be ashamed of that prospect. But more than shame for what we are doing to future generations, we should be alarmed about what we are doing to our economy today. That skyrocketing debt means a burden of uncertainty on our businesses, small and large alike. When businesses and people are uncertain if there will be a fiscal crisis, they limit their investment. Added to the stifling amount of overregulation coming out of Congress and the administration the past 2 years, it means that businesses have one more reason to worry about whether they can afford to add another person to the payroll, and that means fewer jobs. One influential study, endorsed by none other than Treasury Secretary Geithner, found that countries with very high debt burdens suffer from lower economic growth rates. Median growth rates for countries with public debt above roughly the 90% of GDP threshold are about 1% lower than otherwise. The reasons for this are simple. Government borrowing crowds out private investment. The less productive public sector takes resources that could and would be better used by the more productive private sector. We've already crossed the dangerous 90% threshold. Gross debt was 93% of GDP at the end of last fiscal year. And we'll top the 100% barrier by the end of this fiscal year. And under the President's budget, Madam President, the debt will continue to grow rapidly, eventually reaching 107% of GDP. That's even with the gimmicks and questionable assumptions that the White House budget proposal contains, including what I believe are very unrealistic economic growth assumptions. President Obama's own economic advisors have estimated that a 1% increase in GDP translates into 1 million more jobs. Many more people would have jobs today if it weren't for this crushing debt burden. Now, we did finally have some good news last Friday about private sector job creation. Nobody was happier than I was to see that. But the fact remains that the labor force participation rate in the latest unemployment figures was unchanged at 64.2%, the lowest level it's been since the early 1980s. A lot of workers have been so discouraged with the lack of jobs that they've simply stopped looking. And let's not forget that our recovery so far has lagged far behind past recessions. At this point, after the 1981-1982 recession, the economy had already expanded 10%. But the current recovery has only expanded the economy by 0.14%. That's not good enough, Madam President. We all know that if we don't act soon to get control of federal spending and our soaring debt, then any good news will be short-lived. For 2 years, the Pied Pipers of big government told us that they could spend their way out of financial troubles, that the money was free and it would lead to jobs, jobs, jobs. Well, they were wrong. And 2 years of their policies have left us dramatically worse off. It's simple. Too much government spending means too much government debt. That means a weaker economy and fewer jobs. And I think we are finally at the point where most people, even here in Washington, are willing to concede that we need to get a handle on our spending. Even the Obama administration, the biggest spending White House in history, has finally come around to the realization that just maybe we should let the credit card cool off a little bit. Well, there's no better time in America's history to change course regarding federal spending. We are at a moment when we are about to get hit by a succession of 3 budgetary waves. First, the end of the 2-week continuing resolution on March 18th. Then we will have to address the debt limit sometime this spring. And after we've dealt with those 2 things, we need to take up the budget for fiscal year 2012 because the new fiscal year is only 6 months away. Now, none of those is a mystery. None of them snuck up on us. We've seen them all coming. We've had plenty of warning. So we have no excuse for being unprepared. And I'm confident we can come together and solve all three of those issues. We showed we can do it with the 2-week CR, finding $4 billion of spending that we could agree was not our most important national priority right now and could be cut. And thanks to the great work of our friend and colleague, Dr. Coburn, the GAO has confirmed that there are hundreds of billions of dollars in waste and duplication we can begin to scrub out of our federal budget. That's our short-term situation, those three challenges. But there's also been talk of a balanced budget amendment, and I'm a co-sponsor of 2 balanced budget amendments. That's not a short-term fix, that's a long-term issue. So that's the short-term and the long-term, Madam President. In the midterm, we need to come up with additional solutions to get us off what I'd call federal fiscal irresponsibility, budgetary brinksmanship, and deficits as far as the eye can see. We need to get back on the path to prosperity, and that path cannot be built on borrowed money and reckless spending. Getting back on the right path is going to require us to fix our broken budget process. To that end, I am proud to reintroduce a bill that I introduced last year that would establish common-sense reforms to improve transparency and efficiency in our budgeting process. And I'm proud that Senators Chambliss, Crapo, Inhofe, Johans, Kirk, Portman, and Wicker have joined me in co-sponsoring Senate Bill 439, the Deficit Reduction and Budget Reform Act of 2011. If we don't do something to fix this broken system, and soon, we are going to keep getting hit by these budget waves, and sooner or later, they are going to sink us. My proposal has 3 main parts. The first is budget reforms. I propose that we start by reforming pay-go rules to prevent the double-counting gimmicks that too often are used around here, particularly with regard to our trust funds. We saw that double-counting occur during the health care debate last year when hundreds of billions of dollars were double-counted, essentially spent twice during the health care debate. My proposal would make the federal budget a binding joint resolution signed into law by the President. Today, it is a non-binding resolution and routinely gets waived. My proposal calls for a biannual budget timeline, more time for oversight, and to see what's working. And doing a budget in every other year during the odd-numbered years, and then during the even-numbered years, doing oversight, so instead of looking for ways to spend taxpayer dollars, we look for ways to save taxpayer dollars. A legislative line item veto. Governors have it. The President should too. My proposal calls for preventing the abuse of emergency spending designations, which again have become all too routine and all too frequent. Proposal calls for the creation of a new Class Act trigger if that new entitlement program is not solvent over a 75-year time frame. I would also modify the Medicare cost containment trigger to have honest accounting with respect to revenues and savings in the new health care bill. And my proposal also would update the Credit Reform Act to score the purchases of debt, stock, equity, and capital using a discount rate that incorporates market risk rather than the procedure that's been used in the past, which in my view completely understates the cost of many of these programs. And Madam President, I would call for a new standing joint committee of Congress for budget deficit reduction. If you can believe this, there are 26 committees or subcommittees that spend tax dollars, not one that saves tax dollars. That joint committee would be responsible for producing a bill to cut the deficit by at least 10% every budget cycle without raising taxes. This bill would get expedited consideration in both chambers of Congress. And only spending reductions, Mr. President, not tax increases. Tax increases would be off the table. The standing committee, not just issuing one report and closing up shop, its recommendations would get an up or down vote in Congress. And Mr. President, it is interesting to me, there is a precedent for doing this, and I see the senator from West Virginia on the floor. But back in the 1940s, there was a senator from West Virginia named Harry Byrd, who, as they were debating whether or not to raise taxes to fund World War II, came up with an idea and said, before we do that, we ought to look at savings that we can find in our federal budget. And so he proposed a joint committee called the Joint Committee on the Reduction of Non-Essential Federal Expenditures. And they went about the process of scrubbing the federal budget to see if there might be savings that could be achieved that would prevent having to raise taxes to fund the war effort. In the process of doing that, that committee achieved a great many things. It was in existence for about 30 years. And so what this would do, Mr. President, is draw on that precedent and create a joint standing committee in the Congress that would be bicameral, 10 House members, 10 Senate members, bipartisan, 10 Republicans and 10 Democrats, who would have a statutory requirement each budget cycle, I should say, for coming up with a specified amount of savings in deficit reduction through spending reductions. Now, what will we do in the short term? This proposal, Mr. President, would freeze and cap spending. It would pose a 10-year spending freeze at 2008 levels adjusted for inflation. After all, non-defense discretionary spending has increased at an alarming rate since 2008, 22% increase when inflation has amounted to roughly 2%. In other words, non-defense discretionary spending has grown in the last 2 years, Mr. President, at 10 times the rate of inflation. Now, as I said, this is not a quick fix. No plan is going to solve our problems overnight. And I hope we don't take seriously anyone who claims to have a plan that will. But just the same, I don't think we should take seriously any plan that claims an annual deficit of $607 billion is the same as a balanced budget. It's not the same, and it's not good enough. The only thing that is good enough for our children and for the future prosperity of this great country is for us to get our fiscal house in order and to embrace responsible budgeting. We cannot continue to spend money we don't have, Mr. President. We have to learn, like the American people have, to live within their means. We have to learn how to tighten our belts. And I want to close with a couple of statements that I mentioned earlier, the statement by the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, with regard to the greatest threat facing America's national security being our national debt. But I also want to quote what Secretary of State Hillary Clinton called the unexpected $1.3 trillion U.S. deficit. She referred to it as a message of weakness internationally. And she went on to say, and I quote, "It poses a national security threat in two ways. It undermines our capacity to act in our own interest, and it does constrain us where constraint may be undesirable," end quote. That's Secretary of State Hillary Clinton with regard to these year-over-year massive deficits that we continue to run. And just today we heard that PIMCO, one of the largest mutual funds in the country, has decided to dump government debt. It's government debt. And in that story that came out today that was discussing that particular move on their part, there was a quote from a gentleman, Jim Rogers, I should say, who is the co-founder of the Quantum Fund. And he said, and I quote, "U.S. government bonds are not a safe haven. I cannot conceive of lending money to the United States government for 30 years, end quote. I mean, think about that, Mr. President. The United States of America is being viewed increasingly as an unsafe investment because of this massive debt that we are running and what it could mean to the future with regard to inflation and interest rates and the health of our economy and its attractiveness to people not only here at home but around the world as a place for an investment. We have a major, major problem. These are serious times. These are serious problems. These are serious challenges. They require serious solutions and serious leadership. And I hope here in the United States Senate that we are up to that. And as I said before, it starts on several levels. In the near term, we need to get the spending under control. We're trying to do that with the discretionary spending bill that is in front of us. We need to deal with the longer-term issue, and I hope we can pass a balanced budget amendment. We've had votes on that in the past here in Congress, unsuccessfully, narrowly. But we need to put in place what so many states have that require them on an annual basis to balance their budgets. And then we need to put in place budget process reforms that, in my view, will put more of a straitjacket on the Congress and force us to make more of these hard decisions. And I think, frankly, that because we do this every year, this budget every year, we get very preoccupied with 12 appropriation bills and a budget, although Last year, we didn't even pass a budget, nor did we pass a single appropriation bill, which is a major, major failure of this Congress when you're running a $3.7 trillion enterprise called the federal government. But we need to provide in our annual schedule time to do oversight, time to look at what we can be doing not to spend more money but to save money. And if we had a biannual budget process where we're spending money in odd-numbered years and doing the appropriation bills in those years, and then in the even-numbered years when people go home to run for re-election, instead of looking for ways to spend money, we're actually looking for ways to save money, I think these are reforms that are long overdue, Mr. President. And so I hope my colleagues will take seriously this issue of budget process reform. I know it's not a glamorous subject. In fact, I think most people's eyes glaze over when you talk about budget process reform. But in my view, there isn't anything that we could do that would more fundamentally change the way that Washington works than reform this budget process, because it drives everything else. And if we don't start there, we're never going to get this issue of spending and debt under control in the long term. And so, Mr. President, I thank my colleagues who have co-sponsored this bill. I would hope that there will be more colleagues who will join on this bill, and if not this one, something like it, that will, once and for all, change the way that Washington works by undertaking reforms in our budget process here that will lead us to greater fiscal responsibility and greater prosperity for future generations. Mr. President, I yield the floor.